attacks against my family, attacks against my source, and one of the last worst things was someone left in front of my door 6 animals without head, decapitated.
She hired 2 full-time bodyguards and continued to write what would become a best-selling book, Narcoland.
At the beginning, for me, it was really one story difficult to understand and also to believe. When I start to get documents that prove the relation between the government and the drug cartels, I start to get information from members of the government, policemen, members of the army, politicians. They start to explain me really how this works. I discover how the government, since the decade of 70s until 2000, the government used to protect to all the cartels in Mexico. The government negotiated with them. The government let them control parts of Mexico, traffic the drugs to US, and the government for this received a lot of money through bribes.
Her book is forensic, and it's made her a target. Last year, after gunmen broke into her house, she left Mexico. She's clear about who she thinks runs the country.
Now we have cartels, big ones and small ones, that control every part of Mexico.
Is it every part of Mexico or just some parts of Mexico?
Sadly, I have to say that every part of Mexico. I mean, I have documents that proves that in all the states in Mexico operate gangs and drug cartels.
And do you have evidence that shows in every single one of these states the cartels are doing it with the knowledge of the states, the local government?
The documents that I have from the government show names of many congressmen, mayors, also governors that protect the cartels, and the federal government has that information. The question for me is, why if the government knows where, when, whom, why they don't just do something?
What's your thinking as to why the federal government says nothing about this?
My conclusion is that they don't do nothing because they are part of that. I have several documents that prove how the federal police, how members of the army were working for the drug cartels. The point in Mexico is that the cartels really predate all the levels of the government.
But if you look at what the government has been doing about drug cartels in recent years, you'll notice there's been a rise in the number of arrests of the big drug kingpins. Men such as El Chapo Guzman, who have the dubious honour of being described as the most powerful drug trafficker in the world by the US Treasury. So isn't this proof the government is trying to weaken the drug cartel?
That arrest didn't change anything in Mexico. The cartels have not been destroyed. For example, even now El Chapo Guzman is in jail. I have asked the government, please tell me, government, how many bank accounts, how many properties, how many companies have you confiscated to him? And the answer of the government was none.
So drug cartels are running Mexico. That's the assessment of Annabel Hernandez. But is she right about the extent of this control? Mexico is a huge country. There are more than 120 million people living in over 30 states. Are drug cartels really running the show in every one of them? Meet our second expert witness, a man with a slightly different view.
Part 2. Government. Who's running Mexico? Many people are running Mexico. I mean, the institutions are still working at some level, but there are some areas of lawlessness where lawlessness is the main characteristic.
This is Alejandro Hope, a former intelligence officer at CISO, Mexico's civilian intelligence agency, where he worked on droga.
It was something of stress having to deal with cases that involve maiming, that involve mutilation. really extreme forms of violence pretty much every single day.
Alejandro Hope worked there for 4 years, between 2007 and 2011, an experience that changed him.
My period as an intelligence official coincided with the rather significant uptick in criminal violence in Mexico, so something of an obsession about how do you stop this madness.
The disappearance and presumed murder of 43 students 2 months ago is solved by now. And for Alejandro Hope, it illustrates how the power of the cartels has changed. He says they're more interested in local power now, not national.
What you had 10, 15 years ago was large-scale drug trafficking organizations that could gain control of national institutions, and that posed a direct threat to national security in some security of the Mexican state. Those cartels are in some way no longer there. What you have is a hyper fragmentation of that criminal underworld. The newer gangs do not have the financial, political, or military wherewithal to do it, but they do pose a major threat to public safety of many Mexicans.
Ironically, he says this is partly down to arrests. You put a drug lord in prison and the cartel breaks up, with members starting their own, smaller, rival gangs. 10 years ago, there were just 6 dominant cartels. Now, there are more than 80 competing for power.
What you have now is far more fragmented control, and it is becoming increasingly local. For many of these newer gangs, gaining control of a municipal government is far more important than, say, having an army general in its payroll.
So if you're a drug cartel, what do you get out of a relationship with local government?
One, they can provide muscle in the form of municipal police. They can provide information on the movements and special operations of federal and state forces. They are a source of information on the local economy, so they know who owns what. And that's a way of facilitating extortion, for instance. They have resources coming to them from the federal level and from the state level that can also be captured by gangs. So it's an important source of income, an important source of information, and at the extreme, such as Iguala, it's an important source of muscle for the gangs.
Who has the upper hand in the relationship between cartels and local government?
It depends on the region. In some cases, you have a clear separation of local government. In Cho'gath recently, where you saw mayors paying tribute to a local kingpin. In the case of Iguala, it's not clear who is running the show.
So far, the mayor of Iguala has been charged, but not convicted. Nothing has been proven in court. But this doesn't stop speculation about his possible involvement in the disappearance of 43 students. Our bigger point is this. Mexico differs from state to state and changes over time.
Mexico. Cho'gath is not many places where you don't have this type of phenomenon. In some cases, the state has shown itself very weak. Institutions have been hollowed out or captured by the gangs.
You're listening to The Inquiry, the BBC World Service. The disappearance of 43 students has generated outrage in Mexico about the links between gangs and politicians. So we're asking, who runs Mexico? Our first 2 expert witnesses disagreed on the extent of the power held by drug cartels. But they agree on one thing, that the Mexican state itself is weak. So why is this the case? Time for our third expert witness.
Part 3. The long view.
It would be an exaggeration to assert that Mexico is an arms trade. It is far from being that. Although some parts of this country, I am sad to say, they are really run by the drug cartels and organized crime.
This is Enrique Krause, one of Mexico's most prominent historians. Now in his 60s, he's been writing about the Mexican state for decades. He He was a teenager in 1967 when Guerrero State saw one of its most violent episodes, with the killing of 35 peasants. He remembers the an end of his innocence. Now, 45 years later, he sees this latest case of violence as a pivotal moment for the country.
I always believed that Mexico needed to become a democracy. Well, now the dream is here, but the dream is becoming a way, because of course democracy didn't bring happiness or peace or security. We have freedom, but we don't have security.
For generations, the answer to the question, who runs Mexico, was the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI.
We had the PRI, for 7 decades, monopolized power. It was a kind of a collective dictatorship where you had a president king every 6 years. There wasn't much of civic liberties or political liberties or true elections, but there was this, because they co-opted crime.
The PRI lost power in the year 2000 in Mexico's first proper democratic election. That moment marked a change, not only in who would run Mexico, but how. The central government, which acted as a leviathan, relaxed its grip and let local governments take more responsibility.
Some of those local powers are good powers. They're good governors, good mayors. But it has happened once and again in Mexican history. It is like the heartbeat. Long periods of centralized power, less crime. So one and then centralized power seats, reducing crime.
Freedom, or a weaker state, bringing chaos. But the tens of thousands of people who've been marching in protest against the fate of the 43 students don't want either. Enrique Prado says there needs to be a third option.
I am part, and a very proud and convinced part of the immense wave of indignation that the majority of Mexicans feel of seeing their lives threatened, diminished in a kind of Hobbesian situation where life has become cheap, worthless and nasty. But I don't wish to have a new Leviathan. We cannot have it. We need a democratic state, secure law, modern democracy. I think it can be done. And I hope this wave of indignation finds channels, not of violence, but building new institutions, and probably even new, fresh parties organizing themselves in order to build a better Mexico.
That might sound like wishful thinking, but there's a city in Mexico where people are trying to do just that. And it tells us something about who could run Mexico.
Part 4. People power.
Ciudad Juarez was a very close community as far as people knowing everybody.
This is Jose Manuel Mascareñas. He's the head of an educational foundation in Juarez, sitting on the border with Texas. He's remembering life growing up in the good old days.
I was born in 1951, and my father was mayor of Juarez from 1956 to 1959. And I can tell you that the ties were very close.
This was during the days of the PRI, the party that dominated Mexico for decades. As the cartels began to fight for control over this border city, the American drug market, and violence increased, until Juarez became the most dangerous city in the world. In 2006, there were over 200 killings. In 2010, there were over 3,000.
Times were very difficult. It was scary to move around. It was very insecure. You had the army here in the city. You had the state police. You had the municipal police. Everybody going in their own direction. And the public was caught in between.
By 2008, it was clear the local authorities were overwhelmed, and in many cases, explicit and violent. The government had enough. It deployed 10,000 soldiers and federal police.
In the beginning, it scared everybody. It scared mostly the criminal gangs. The community was very thankful that the soldiers were here, and 4 months later everybody was saying, we hope you go away because you have not helped us solve the problem.
Living in a city where the local government is not in control.
You have gangs coming in from the southern part of Mexico, extortioning or kidnapping or charging for quotas in order for the businesses to operate.
And this is where the story could have ended. A cautionary tale of a city with hollowed-out institutions run, in effect, by drug cartels. But this is not the end. Something happened. The murder rate dropped, and they're even trying to win back American tourists. Some say it's simply because the Sinaloa cartel has won control of the drug trade. Others say something else changed. Ordinary people fought for more power.
Once the forces were organized and coordinated, that's when society became involved, saying, hey, we have to put a stop to this and we have to work in this direction, and that's when things started to change.
The killing fires unleashed a powerful civil movement. Ordinary people created mesas, or working groups. They would meet government officials in hotels, often setting the agenda. The security working group was particularly effective. It's now seen by some as the best example of civil society engagement with government anywhere in Mexico. One of its successes has been the resolution of kidnapping and extortion cases. Suspects have been tried and put in prison.
Before those years, extortion was not considered a crime. So now it's considered a crime. Now for extortion, they are giving life sentences. So things have changed because first of the coordination of the government levels, secondly because of the involvement of the population in the decision-making process, and thirdly because of the harsher laws and sentences for criminals of that kind.
Representatives from those working groups are now traveling around Mexico, telling others how they did it. Could this be a model?
Local civil society to organize and put pressure on local and state level actors, which are taking places like Ciudad Juarez, so as to force them to actually start reforming local institutions.
Alejandro Hope, the intelligence said that because drug cartels are overpowering local government, it's here that the changes need to be made.
Put the onus on the state governments to reform the police forces, the criminal justice system, prisons, so on and so forth.
For Enrique Krause, the mass protests at the fate of the 43 students present an opportunity.
People in the streets and in the social media, they feel indignation. How do we tackle this? I hope it will make us work together to build and strengthen our national institutions.
This echoes the official President Enrique he vowed to take action to reform the security institutions. But the whole process coincided his presidency about a new Mexico, wooing investors with bold economic reforms. Instead, he made his time in office defined by his reaction to the disappearance of the students and his ability to persuade both Mexicans and the international community that it's not the cartels, but the government that runs Mexico.
The Inquiry is produced in London. Special thanks this week to our researcher, Jessica Benanu. We want to know what you want to know, so demand an inquiry. Get in touch at the World Service Facebook page or by Twitter at BBC The Inquiry. And don't forget, we're available as a free podcast.
The BBC World Service.
Koniec serii. We have the headline.
Democracy protests have spread to new parts of Hong Kong.
But we go further.
I am on a pedestrian walkway looking down into the sea of people that have taken to the streets here. People as far as the eye can see, thousands of them.
Telling us how it is.
I'm right on the border between Turkey and Syria, and within the last few minutes, two very large explosions just a few hundred meters from where we were standing.
Giving people a voice.
I tried to stay positive, although I was scared when I saw my relatives dying in front of me.
Looking to the future.
The Liberian President, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, has appealed to all countries to help fight the Ebola virus.
It is the duty of all of us to send a message that we will not leave millions of West Africans to fend for themselves.
BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
A glamorous woman strides onto the stage. She draws the eyes of the crowd, leans into the microphone and starts to preach.
And I'll tell you, friends, don't let the devil sit down beside you and frighten your way.
Her name was Amy Semple McPherson. She invented broadcast evangelism. Then one day she went missing. I'm Naomi Grimley here on the BBC World Service. Find out what happened to Sister Amy.
BBC News with Marion Marsh. The state governor of Missouri has ordered reinforcements into the American town of Ferguson a day after widespread rioting followed a decision by a grand jury not to prosecute a white policeman who killed a black teenager. Governor Jay Nixon said more than 2,200 National Guardsmen would be drafted in. In continuing unrest, demonstrators briefly closed a main road in central St. Louis. Protesters confronted police officers on the steps of the federal courthouse. The dead teenager, Michael Brown, they said they rejected the grand jury's decision. Hospital workers in Nigeria say nearly 80 people have been killed in 2 bombings in the northern city of Maiduguri. 2 women, believed to be Boko Haram militants, are believed to have carried out the suicide attacks. A museum in Poland says thieves have stolen 8 shoes that belonged to Jewish Holocaust victims at a former concentration camp. The footwear had been on display at the Second World War Majdanek death camp, where the Nazis killed 80,000 prisoners. Residents of the northeastern Syrian city of Raqqa say at least 60 people have been killed in a series of government airstrikes. Many civilians, including children, were killed in raids on 9 targets across the city, a stronghold of the Islamic State group. 2 robbers who took a woman hostage after a high-speed chase across Paris have released her and given themselves up to French police. Earlier, the men held up the Cartier jeweller's shop near the Champs-Élysées. The Argentine footballer Lionel Messi has set a new goal-scoring record in the European Champions League. Messi scored his 72nd goal in the competition during the first half of Barcelona's match at Atoll Nicosia in Cyprus. He went on to complete a hat-trick. BBC News.
I'm Naomi Grimley and I've come to this beach outside Los Angeles between Santa Monica and Venice.
It's around 3 in the afternoon, and Amy likes to go down.
Social story innkeeper takes us back nearly 9 decades. Amy Semple McPherson was at the beach to take a swim and write a sermon. Her loyal assistant Emma Schaffer was with her.
Schaffer needs to go back to the hotel to make a telephone call. She makes quite a short call, and by the time she gets back to the tent, she doesn't see Amy in the water anymore. She assumes that she must have gotten out. She looks for her. She does not see her. She talks to the lifeguards. No one has seen her. And there is no sign of Amy.
Rumours of Amy Semple McPherson's disappearance swept through LA. By the next morning, one of the newspapers had printed a picture of her on the front page with a simple question. drowned or kidnapped. So who was this woman who sparked so much interest? What impact did she have on America? And why does her dramatic life still matter? On the BBC World Service, this is the story of Sister Amy.
As many as the Lord our God shall call, and if ever that you're dead of the Holy Ghost today, oh, don't be like this muffin, and let the spider of the old devil frighten you away. Dig deep, take hold of God's promise for you. Praise the Lord.
Amy Elizabeth Kennedy was born on a farm in Ontario, Canada in 1890. As a teenager, she'd gone along to hear an Irish Pentecostal preacher speak in her local town. Malaria. He died, she survived, pregnant with her first child. When Amy returned to America, she herself felt the call to travel and preach.
She would, stand out and stare at the sky, and some strange people would come and gather around her because the pretty girl was clearly lost her mind. And then she would come with me to the tabernacle, and it was so lovely and precious place. And the group kind of gathered around her. That's how she would draw people.
She turned out to be her most popular was her singing.
Matthew Sutton, author of Amy Semple McPherson and the Resurrection in America. Word soon travelled about these gatherings. People on crutches or with arms in plaster, hoping she would go.
There were a lot of people who came to see what they saw as a freak show, and there were others who came legitimately to be healed. And then there were always accounts that the journalists would relay of people who came as skeptics and walked away as converts.
This popularity, though, came at a price. McPherson's second husband was unimpressed that his wife was more interested in her career as a preacher than she was with her domestic duties. He filed for divorce. Now a single mother with 2 children, Sister Amy looked west to find a more permanent base for her ministry.
Amy came to Los Angeles in 1919 for the opportunity.
Here's social historian Richard Shave. He hosts bus tours of Los Angeles with his wife, Sue Cooper.
For the temple. She wins. She float wins in the roast break.
By 1923, Amy Semple McPherson was highly successful. She built this place. It's the Angelus Temple in Echo Park. It's shaped a bit like a wedding cake. Perched on top of her dome with a neon cross. And next to that, 2 radio bars. Across the airways to listen.
Right now, out in Hollywood, the transcription company is sitting in on this station, and they're getting those big platters. They're going to record now this sermon. The voice you hear was that of Amy Semple McPherson. Let's give Sister McPherson a little encouragement as she starts this sermon.
The temple opened She owns a radio station. She started her own religious base.
Jesus began to touch him. He turned over and said to the pain is gone. Was it the things that you're melting away? And I came back up to the platform. And with all I love you and my faithful, loyal workers who will take her by the hand. She rose with.
She feeds people, their souls and their stomach. She clothes people. She gives me everything else.
Amy went down to
Well, after a while, began to gather here. Search parties formed, and followers of the preacher woman came to keep a vigil on the ground.
They would be a young man named Robert Browning, 26 years old, was in Manhattan Beach, and he thought he saw something floating out the water that could have been Amy, and he swam out. It was a couple of dead fish. In the course of time.
That's the denomination that Murray created.
The way that it looked like it was still the stained glass constantly the upper deck wooden chairs. If you look straight up, of its time, painted on the inside to be clouds.
McPherson began advertising and began